Thanks everyone for joining us. And thank you for those of you populating the chat with who you are and where you're from and what brought you to this conversation today. I'm so grateful to my friends all on the screen. I'm so grateful I can call you all friends too. What a great group of folks joining us as we talk a bit about General Convention and what happened and what the implications are for the church and for the average person and for our communities. I think this is going to be a really great conversation. So I will start by introducing myself. I am Lydia Buckland, and my connection to Virginia Theological Seminary is that I serve as the project director of the Mutual Ministry Initiative, which is a Lilly-funded project focusing on equipping folks and seminarians and folks in theological education around shared collaborative ministry, which is a ministry we need in our churches these days as our all of our environments are changing and shifting in who we are as church. So I also serve as canon to the ordinary for discipleship and vitality in the Diocese of Northern Michigan. We are a tiny little diocese tucked way up north on Lake Superior. And I was a deputy to General Convention and served as the chair of the Legislative Committee on Diocesan and Congregational Vitality. So I can share a bit about what happened with that crew. I would love to invite, Edwin. Would you like to share who you are?
Hey, everybody. I'm Edwin Johnson. I'm the rector of St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Dorchester, Massachusetts. It's a neighborhood in Boston. And I, too, was also a deputy to this most recent convention. I chaired the Committee on Social Justice and U.S. Policy and had a lot of fun with several of the people on this screen at convention as well. So just excited to be here with everybody, feeling blessed, excited, and ready to go. I'm going to kick it to Leon.
Yate Hamlet School. Hello and welcome. I graduated out of the Virginia Theological Seminary 2019, and soon after I was placed at the Good Shepherd Mission here, Navajoland Area Mission in Fort Defiance, Arizona. So I was a co-chair for the deputies, House of Deputy for Navajoland, and really was inspired to move resolutions forward with our committee and with our deputies. So it was really fun to be there and to see personal growth happen. And it was just a wonderful thing to be part of. So thank you for having me with you today.
Thanks, Leon. Are you on a road trip? It looks like you're on a fun road trip.
Yeah, I'm here at my doctor's appointment. I got an eye appointment, so I figured I'd jump on for an hour before I get there. Albuquerque, New Mexico right now.
Sweet. Thanks for multitasking to be with us. How about Jeff? You want to go next?
Sure. I'm Jeff Lee. I serve as the Bishop Provisional in the Diocese of Milwaukee at the moment. I was the chair of the House of Bishops side of Committee 12, Perfect Liturgy and Music. And we've been busy. It's funny when the script, I'm not sure how it is in the House of Deputies, but the script for presenting reports in the House of Bishops begins this way. Presiding Bishop Jeff Lee, on behalf of your committee, number 12, we are organized for business. We were organized for business 6 months ago, as other cognate chairs will vigorously shake your heads. So we had a lot to do at this convention, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bishop Lee. And Missy?
Missy.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I hit the chat instead of the unmute. Hi, I'm Missy Marine in the Diocese of Los Angeles at the Parish of St. Matthew, where I am Director of Program Ministry. And I begin with apologies because we are in the midst of day camp. So if you hear yelling and chaos and music and frivolity, I'm just going to apologize that you are not here to enjoy it, because it's awesome, but it's all around me all the time. I am generally the advocacy chair for Forma, And this year I was invited to be the coordinator for the General Convention official youth presence at General Convention, which did not happen. So, but I did get to work and train with those 17 youth to help them prepare for convention and to speak in front of committees and with their testimony. And I'm really thankful to all of you who are writing in the chat about what you're curious about.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And thanks, Missy, for drawing our attention to those missing youth presence. I think, as we think back to General Convention as it was, and the things that were great about kind of the shorter down to business stuff, like personally, I kind of liked the condensed business work where it wasn't as performative in some ways. I think people getting up to the microphone, like the shorter amount of time was like, you really got to have something to say to get up there, you get it in the next person. Like it just felt, it felt very efficient in that way, but there were things I think that we all missed, such as the official youth presence, such as that sense of just community festival gathering. How about others? How do you feel about how it was in this new way?
This is Leon from Navajoland. There seemed to be an intimacy with convention this year. I noticed as we went out for break for lunch, and even after the daily sessions, I could see deputies from their diocese sitting together and eating. And that's one thing I've really noticed the difference between other conventions and now. There seemed to be more of a cohort and a camaraderie with the different dioceses, and even our deputy, where we're sitting around and being together during the time. And I think it really brought family focus back into the convention, looking at with all the movements happening and just the spirit being part of the entire thing. It was really wonderful to see dioceses eating together and kind of being present with each other. It was a good thing I saw.
Lydia, I'll just echo, I think what I heard you pointing to, there was a sense of efficiency, not in a cold way, with my experience, in fact, quite the opposite. But a generous use of the consent calendar, I think, coupled with 4 days, had a focusing effect, or it was a tool for me anyway, and others I talked to felt we were not expending a lot of energy on, I don't want to call any resolution inconsequential, I don't mean that, but things that really need less discussion. That gave us room for, I think, more profound conversations about some central matters that really are important. And they rose to the surface because we had to. So I'll say more later, I think, about what I saw in the House of Bishops, but it was kind of stunning, actually, what happened because of all of that, I think. Mm-hmm. Pluses and minuses. I miss the jamboree.
Great word. Too, yeah, I wonder the impact praying together in each house. I miss praying together as one body and starting the day together in prayer and then going straight into action. I wonder, and I was speaking with Lester McKenzie, who's the chaplain of House of Deputies. We were reflecting on, did that, because it did feel like it felt like we were one body in terms of just, it was surprising to me, particularly in the areas around justice, racial reconciliation, naming white supremacy, naming the colonial history. I felt a sense of a shift as a body of the church, that we were kind of like past a point I didn't know we were at. Like in the past, when we had these conversations, it kind of felt like that via media, like, well, some of us are there, some of us aren't quite there. We need to honor everyone. But for whatever reason, this time felt like, oh, we're all there. Like, oh, okay, I guess we can get to work. Like we're there. Certainly there were a couple of dissenting voices. I heard some conversations in Starbucks in the line, people who didn't quite get it all. But for the most part, it felt it felt like something had shifted to me. I wonder if you all experienced that too.
Yeah, I definitely felt that way. You know, I think it blessed the room in, I think, really special ways to be worshiping there together, and I think it lended some, or rather than lended, I think it revealed some of the sacredness and the other work that we were doing. And so I definitely felt that way as well. I mean, I think for me, the piece that I adore and miss is the chance to, I think, incorporate a broader range of our senses in worship that can happen when we are in spaces that are designed to do that. You know, I mean, really, we more or less just had the words, and then, you know, you take the singing away and there's some other things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think while there's some minuses and some losses that we'd all acknowledge, I appreciated how it brought us together, and it brought us to those places. And I'm hoping to sort of get some of that other stuff back while keeping those blessings. I'm just thinking more broadly about the truncated piece. You know, I reflect with everybody else that I love the efficiency. I hope that we can take some of that forward while still having more time together, and then using that time for other things. You know, I'm a big fan of figuring out what we're going to do and then keeping all the minds in the room for one more day so that we can figure out, okay, how we're going to do this and what are the networks we want to form now, you know, while everybody's, or not everybody, but while many people are together. And so, yeah, I'd be excited about that too. Just reflect, also miss the kiddos. I know my children were really excited about the children's program this year. And, you know, I think that, you know, I'm hoping and praying already that we'll have more of that in Louisville. So.
It's interesting as I hear you all talk as people who are there together, your sense of pieces of the reflection and what was happening, it feels different than what I felt. That, you know, this was, I think, the first convention in about 20 years that I wasn't present at. But I watched, so it was delightful to watch all of convention in yoga pants, and get up and grab a new cup of tea whenever I wanted to, and sit in completely inelegant ways as I crossed my legs on my couch. But I didn't get the sense as I was watching that togetherness. Because that's not what was conveyed through live stream. We only heard who stood up to talk. And that sense of we are engaged together didn't come through, in my opinion, through that means. And so it almost feels, I'm trying to kind of process how I feel about it, that it feels almost more disconnected because the choices that were made to not include, in a place where we truly believe as the Episcopal Church that the Holy Spirit speaks to us in community when we're gathered. And so that not having that full community there, it's really interesting for me to hear hear each of you talking about the way in which it felt together. And the disconnect that I felt, and not having people there like young people, not having most of the staff of the Episcopal Church there. And it made me kind of go, how are we making decisions for the Episcopal Church when there are really vital people there to a conversation who aren't there?
Yeah, thank you for naming that. I see in the chat too, there's someone who felt the exact same way, that we worship the altar of efficiency way too much. And I think, you know, and I don't want to dominate, I'm facilitating, but I just love this conversation so much. I just wonder about that, at what point we became conflated as a body of the Episcopal Church gathering to do business. Like maybe the general convention wasn't about doing the business as primary. Like maybe that if then we narrow it to business, then it feels like it's not enough. Maybe what are we missing then that we can recreate in a way that is accessible and open and life-giving, that wraps around the business or something? Like how do we create that sense of connection? Yeah, Leon, I see your hand up.
Yes, so I kind of had a hand in a lot of what we were talking about, having online businesses, being part of Committee 9, Racial Reconciliation Justice, working through resolutions. And that to me seemed like it was fairly efficient to being able to be there and set some times. And it was all just the schedules that hindered us a little bit. But I think for the most part, the business part of working through resolutions and being able to sit in the Zoom with the conversations that we could have, so that the business part took place. On the other hand, the flip side of that, I can see when we had testimonies and hearings, it was hard for people to be part of it. And I don't think a lot of the voices were heard or in a way that really started to influence the committees, because you had a shorter time. You had some, we had a couple that was doing a committee hearing for another committee, and they would switch over and they would, we're like, okay, I'm here now. And it was fairly little unorganized with how it was working. And it really didn't feel the spirit when the hearings were being done. And that kind of, for us, Navajoland, hearings are kind of the place where we get to practice our voice. We get to feel passionate about a resolution and go and present what we had. And that really didn't allow our elders, because they're in places where the internet's not there. They're in places where they're not efficient with the Zoom or the technology. And so they felt like it was too much for them to be part of that. And yet at the same time, when we come to convention, the same elders that are deputies really started to own the moment. They really started to take part of what their voice had to say during the floor. And it really surprised me to see some of our first-time deputies come and get up and passionately speak to the resolutions that we were putting forward. This has been a journey from the very beginning, discerning what resolutions we want to put forward and being part of the entire process, the shifting, the rewriting, all of that being taking place, and then getting to the convention, and really just letting the Holy Spirit take form and just allowing. And our fear was, the convention shorter, and my fear was that if we testify on certain things, are we going to be heard? Because there's so many things that are going to be coming up with issues. So we really need to have a presence in ourselves, being forward with convention and how that might look with the resolutions that we put forward. And I'm just so amazed about how the Spirit has just lifted the entire floor to just feel and be more compassionate. And it wasn't just our resolutions. There was so much testimony from the next generation, the younger transition generation, that are coming to convention and are feeling like they have voice now. And I think that's part of Gay Jennings' philosophy when she comes to the floor and she says, wait, hold on, take a deep breath, start the clock over, and let's start over. And that makes you feel, she did that to me in the last convention. And, I felt more confident. I felt more involved, being able to do things with the resolutions and be more involved in testifying. So I think that transition was an important piece, because then there was a little bit of vulnerability, there was a little compassion, and it really brought a lot of people come forward to have their voice. So yes, having the understanding, yes, the business part of being online, and the dysfunction of not being personal and not being able, and all the voices may not have been heard. And I think that's the unfortunate thing. We probably need to look at that. But still, taking this culture of how we look at convention and moving it forward into the next convention. Before we started the first day, our deputies went outside and we did a smudge. We took a smudge and we prayed and we smudged ourselves, and other people showed up. Other people showed up and they were part of the smudge, and other dioceses, and they took part in it. In other general conventions, we would do the Navajo Blessing Way prayer right before we start every session. And we started to have a crowd come around our table before we even started. And that helped people process, and the anxiety and the confidence all came through. And so I think just the practices of family and being part of convention really helped a lot of us feel more welcome to participate.
I would just want to take a moment to commend, Leon, you and the work of your deputation and the Episcopal Church in Navajoland and Indigenous ministries in general worked real hard this convention to get some really important resolutions forward and to make sure your voices were heard. And the moment after DO80, so DO80 was one that had come to my committee actually, and was to ask that Navajoland could have more of a say in who their next bishop, in who their future bishops are. And it's complicated, right? Because the canons say that it should be a provisional bishop who's already a bishop. That hasn't necessarily happened in the past. That's all that. So it got very complicated with what's allowed in the canons and how can we change it. And we were able to work through it to say, even if we can't change the rules by this, we can ask that these voices be included, that people be listened to and heard and honored, and that they be part of this process in meaningful ways. And we found a way, I think, to compromise, to still, it wasn't perfect, right? But it was powerful. And then ended up on the consent calendar, which was a good thing, so we wanted it to go through. But then when you all stood up, and Kathlena Plummer told the story of her father, who was the first Indigenous bishop, Stephen Plummer, and how this was his dream. And for them to have so many Dene deputies and clergy now and leaders, and everyone stood up, and you had received a standing ovation. And that, beautiful, beautiful moment that I think embodied just the importance of doing this work together in community, and hearing a boarding school survivor stand up and share about her experience. All of the focus and testimony on racial reconciliation, on truth telling, on reckoning, the amount of money. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to the budget that passed and that the financial implications of the kind of work that will fund. Edwin, were you part of that? You were part of that work for the social justice. We've been part of the Becoming Beloved community work for a long time. So part of what will be funded is a forensic study into how the money of the Episcopal Church has come to be, on whose backs maybe our buildings and land is on, and then the other resolution. So A125 includes $400,000 to start up funds for a new Episcopal coalition for racial equity and justice, and the research on the Episcopal Church's historic ties to federal system on Indigenous boarding schools. So big implications in terms of the work we have to do.
Yeah, no, big time. I mean, I know and thanks for mentioning those, Lydia. I had the chance to work with the Truth and Reckoning working group, and so we had a special session, sort of a special administrative session to look through all of those resolutions, and yeah, that was really moving. And I think what is exciting, especially A125, that sort of funds a coalition, a group of people who are going to be working on it, is this idea that we're committing to this for the long haul. And for me, I'm always thinking, I feel like I'm in between worlds, because I'm always thinking about my ancestors, and I'm also always thinking about not just my children, but the children they'll have, and more broadly, generations to come. And I feel like in the work that we are now finally taking seriously, of both reckoning with our past and then also committing to really being led by those most impacted in the future, that we're honoring both of those groups. So that was really, really, really exciting. And I think going forward, I'm excited to see us really take that approach even more often, of figuring out, okay, what are the bits of work that fit together in one way, shape, or form, and how can we sort of treat it as a whole, so that as opposed to just having a resolution here, a resolution there, we can, sort of jointly say yes to where God might be calling us. So now that was really, really exciting, and yeah, I'm excited to continue that work.
I think what Leon and what Edwin and Lydia, some of what you all have just been referring to, and some questions that are in the chat that I think all fit together. I think it's important for us not to think of this as a dichotomy of that there is business at General Convention and then there is conversation, or I think what Brian Sellers Peterson called the family reunion. That it's important that all of what happens in the houses and on the floor is important, but those conversations that are happening around what Leon is talking about with his deputation doing in front of the convention center, the conversations that happen at lunch, the times when I actually have to look the person in the face who I think is a complete moron, and discover that, wow, they're not. They're actually human, just like I am, and I have to face that, and that we're all going to go and have Eucharist together and then come back and continue the conversation. That there isn't really a difference between business and conversations at convention, that all of that is business together. It's the only way that we actually see each other, really, we see the face of God in each other. That those pieces are vitally important too.
Thanks, Missy. Go ahead, Leon.
I think one of the things that we learned a lot about racial reconciliation and justice and how this applies to General Convention. I sit on a committee, advisory board for Brad Hoff in the Indigenous Missioner's Office. And about 3-4 years ago, he put out a survey on the racial audit for the deputies of General Convention and bishops of General Convention. And there wasn't a lot of response to taking that survey. And that told us that there was a dysfunction between what people feel like General Convention would have an impact and the actual diocese and parish that they serve for. And so and we figured out that resolutions that we're putting forward, like we put several resolutions in the past asking the church to look at the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, and applying that to some type of education for future leaders so that they would get a better understanding about some of these genocide practices while they're serving as a calling for God. And so that wasn't welcome very, very well. And so the resolution just kind of fizzled out and nothing ever happened to that. A lot of partners that come out to Navajo land, we would ask them about these resolutions. They would say, nope, I have no idea. We didn't know there was a doctrine of discovery. We didn't know there was. And now we're hearing a lot of questions about how can we reconcile what has happened? How would we as partners that come out start to have that process of healing, having that process of sharing and being part of community? So within this last 3 years, we've been working with our partners to actually look at a pilgrimage style visitation that help have those conversations, help to ask those awkward questions that that people are afraid to ask while you're just introducing. So we've created kind of these spaces and allowing that conversation. And I say this because I feel like this has allowed us maybe to start looking at some type of a healing process that allows the offender, the recipients to actually have a conversation of healing moving forward so that everybody is honored in their voices. And I feel like maybe accepting some of these resolutions that help look for the boarding school, the impact it's made. And I can guarantee you right now, other congregations right now in our parish are coming forward and they're asking, is this the church really has done this with us? We put it out in the Navajo Nation papers because we want them as the newspapers to put it out that people can come to us with their stories, come to us to share what they want, because that is where healings start to happen, and the church keeps moving forward, then that will help all of us start to heal that process. And I feel like maybe that's what we could offer to the church, is offering that healing piece for those that don't understand how do we transition into healing, how do we accept what's happening. And so maybe that would be a great healing place for the church that would start to have that.
Thank you. That's such a great example of how legislative action and can trickles down into our local communities and does really make an impact. We're seeing that as well in Northern Michigan with the truth telling and reconciliation work we're doing with our tribal communities, that they're seeing the articles that the Episcopal Church took a stand on this, and they're saying, oh, okay, so it is more than just you all that we can build relationship with. You are standing for this as a body. That means something, right? That we stand together as a body. I would love to switch gears a little bit and turn to Jeff. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened with liturgy and the prayer book at General Convention? The big resolution that passed is kind of misleading in AO59 because it talks about, it's canonical talk, right? About like Title 10 and what happened and what does that mean for us?
Canonical talk, it's actually constitutional talk. And
constitutional, thank you for the
one
correction.
of the things that made it so complicated to try to explain to folks. Shortly after AO59 was passed in its final form, I had texts and questions from people. What did you just do to the prayer book? And my somewhat flippant answer, but I think it's accurate, is nothing. We didn't do anything to the prayer book. What we did was to amend Article 10 of the Constitution of the Episcopal Church, reminding everybody that the Book of Common Prayer is actually part of the Constitution. And for the first time, among other things, we offered a definition of what the prayer book is. And it was a significant thing. It sounds like, well, duh, it's the prayer book. But in fact, what AO59 does is, first of all, to create a constitutional framework for future revision and some clarity of the variety of rights we already have in one authorized form or another. There's no systematic way to account for these things. A great step forward was taken a couple of years ago, but now funded and actually in resolution form, to create, it's already there, to maintain and curate a website that contains every right that has been authorized under any form. It's called episcopalcommonprayer.org. And I urge you to put it in your on your speed dial. If you want to know, well, EOW has what authorization, it'll tell you there. It's all spelled out, and the texts of the rights themselves. So what this, in a nutshell, what this constitutional amendment did was, as I say, to create a framework or some architecture for future revision, which we've got to have in place with the clarity about what other rights are out there. What it's not about, and this was the fear lurking behind, I think, a lot of head scratching and frankly dubiousness about AO59. I think lurking behind it was the specter of a wiki prayer book that I could sit down at my breakfast table and create a really spectacular liturgy and upload it, and it would be part of the Book of Common Prayer. No. If anything, what we're hoping for, I think what's behind the intent of the constitutional amendment, is to create a rigorous scrutiny of rights that will eventually be considered to have the impact of the prayer book, so that we're not just putting things out there without any plan of trial usage for evaluation. The process that really resulted in the 1979 prayer book, we have to have a constitutional assurance that will happen. That's now in it. And it does envision, this constitutional amendment, the natural expansion of what we mean by the Book of Common Prayer. Whether there will be the next prayer book will be pages bound between buckram remains to be seen. It might very well be that those texts are now curated online in an online format, or who knows what in the next decade. But this constitutional provision makes space for that. Also, it should be noted that in the face of social shifts and legal opinions being offered, that matters such as the rights of marriage for everyone have a pathway to be considered, to have the effect, to have the oomph of prayer book material. That is now possible before wholesale prayer book revision happens, and we get whatever the finished product is going to be. So I don't know if that answers it. It's complex. There are lots of moving parts, but if anyone asks you, what did you do to the 79 prayer book? The answer is nothing. It's still there. Don't worry. So that is
very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so helpful. And I think that sorry, I was just going to question answer really quickly. I was surprised at how many opinions there were around people about concrete, whether they wanted a hard book to hold and to hand out and to gift and to, or whether we'd ever be okay with things living in a cloud that we can pull from. And just that sense of like this transitional, this liminal space that we're in, and how our senses play into all of that.
I find it hard to imagine that we won't find a way, as you say, either for gift purposes or private devotion. But, as Bishop Wayne Smith, who's the Provisional in Southern Ohio, who's worked on these matters for a long time, said, we made this decision to curate online when we first discovered you could cut and paste a PDF. How common it is in our church now to have electronic materials downloaded to create resolutions, liturgical patterns. I push it another step further. I think we decided to do this when we adopted the 79 prayer book, because that was the earthquake. We went from a singular text, start on page 30, end on page 120, to having a curated collection. It was printed on paper. Nevertheless, it became a library.
You could choose your own adventure as you went.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is not new, really.
Right. I see some questions in the chat, Jeff, for you in particular. Can you say a bit about the climate in the House of Bishops during that process? And I heard a bit about this. I think it was maybe your first legislative day that you all dove kind of deep into.
We did AO59, which is an amended version of which passed, was the product of the task force on prayer book revision. A couple of years of scrutiny and tossing that beach ball around and working very hard on it. Came to committee 12 appropriately, again, for lots of work. So AO59 came to the floor of the House of Bishops because it's the house of initial action. There was head scratching and concern, and wait a minute, what, the prayer book is going to be online now? As I say, the specter of a wiki prayer book loomed large. So there was a resolution called B011, which was attempting not to squash prayer book revision and its ongoing evolution, but to be, I think it's fair to say, was trying to be much more cautious about creating different categories for different kinds of liturgical material, rather than a kind of clear one pathway toward prayer book status or some kind of provisional status. So that became a kind of a little bit of a duel. Larry Provenzano, the Bishop of Long Island, is the proposer, and so it became the Larry and Jeff show for a little bit at the microphone, backing and forthing. But we stood there together to say, we're aimed at the same thing. How do we move forward? And then we had the luxury, this couples, sort of fuels what I said earlier about, at least in the House of Bishops, we found ourselves having some more time to stop legislating for a minute and just to talk, so that everybody was able to say what the prayer book means in their lives and in the lives of their congregations and the life of the church. What do we mean by prayer book? Individual feelings about stuff, yeah, that's important, but also a very thoughtful engagement of what does this mean for us? We took a good long time to have that conversation, and I believe it was another instance of the Holy Spirit at work, something I thought I wasn't sure I would ever see in the House of Bishops around matters of liturgy, particularly when among those matters of liturgy were about marriage rights for everybody. Not that everybody was of a single mind, but when it came time, the vote was unanimous.
Wow.
I had goosebumps. It was a moment. And it was not, as I say, not unanimous in the sense that everybody agreed with everything, but a sense of the body has spoken here, and we're not going to stand in its way.
Yeah, that's how it felt. I thought it felt that way in the House of Deputies too. There was a sense that, okay, we're at this place, even though we might not all agree, but we recognize that that's where we're at. And so just let's bring others with us along.
Or find it uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with being, nothing wrong with being uncomfortable. Yeah. So
sorry.
No, that's just a quick.
Okay. I was just going to say, someone said, so the review of language in Book of Common Prayer and Hymnal, that was on the consent. Remind me, I can't keep track.
I believe what you're referring to is the overall commitment of the church to self-examination around issues of colonialism and patriarchy and all the stuff, to look with disciplined attentiveness to our liturgical texts for racism and colonialism and the isms that devalue that run against what we say we are by holy baptism. So
right, how it's just trickled in there. And so someone asked, how logistically, when does that start? How does that happen? Whose job is that to do?
And so that was another one of the ones that came out of the Truth and Reckoning working group. And in terms of when does it start? Well, actually, it's been going on already. And I think what the resolution allows us to do is to put some more oomph and funding behind that work and to really just make it official. And so that's pretty critical. A funny thing that occurred is, and I think this speaks to some of what Jeff was talking about, when that resolution came before the floor, I got up to speak for it, and another member of my deputation got up to speak against it. And I think what's so present in all of that is this deep sense of just how much we hold on to these words, how valuable our prayers are to us, and this real sense that these are the words that have formed us, and what does it mean to reckon with the colonialism and the other isms that are part of them, and does that mean they need to go away? And that brings justifiably so fear and concern and disagreement. And so I loved that, and I'm glad we landed where we are. And so if anybody here has some fire in their belly around that work, please know that we're definitely looking for people who are interested in really digging into the language, because we need that, and folks who come from different perspectives. There's stuff that I'm going to miss that other people are going to get.
That's critical. Yep.
So one of the questions that came in the question answer is, so what about this idea of a truncated general convention going forward? What does this group feel about how we move forward and what we would like to see?
I'm not about that life at all. Bring it back. No, I think I want our peeps back. I think a lot of people say, okay, I didn't like when people talked about it as, okay, you just want, the essential. No, everyone is essential. And so I think that we absolutely need that. What I would appreciate though, and maybe not everybody would have the energy or would want this, but I would love for us to keep a schedule actually fairly similar for those first couple days, and get to the point where we have several days left, a day or two left, and everything's been voted on, and we get to break into small groups across deputations, across orders, even across houses, and figure out, okay, so who's going to work on this and who's going to work on that, and how can this matter, to our people, and really soak in. And I feel like oftentimes at every convention, we spend all this time baking this amazing cake and then not really getting a chance to eat it or distribute it. And I think that if we take some of the lessons about how to move through our legislation with us, then we can do that and then get to that second piece that I think is going to impact folks more.
Lydia, I'll just add one thing. For the longest time, and when you just sparked this in me, the part I regret most, I think, is the sequestering of House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. My heart has longed for a unicameral structure for a long time. I'm a voice crying in the wilderness often, but it's so easy to get the impression that we're somehow in separate businesses, and we're not. And I think when we can come together, even just to be in the same room, it's a visceral manifestation. No, this is one church. We have orders for the sake of good boundaries and clarity and all the rest of it. I get that, different functions. But that part I missed. And bravo to we at least heard the same sermons. Thank God for technology.
Yes. Yes. And it would have been great to see each other's reactions too. We had these little moments where our presiding officers were on speakerphone and we could kind of hear the laughter in the background. And it was this sense like, oh, peeking in, but like, I don't know, could we have done like a live camera zooming or something? It really did feel that sense of separation and of being in like really different parts of, to even get to the rooms we were in was like way over and above. And so we maybe saw our own bishops sometimes, but that sense of separation between the House of Bishops and House of Deputies to me was, I did not like that.
All for good reasons. I think, last I heard this morning, something like, I don't remember the number, but like 3% of attendees we know have positive test results.
Very low. Yeah.
That's extraordinary, actually. So
yes. It was great. Thank you for being the rational voice.
I still missed it.
Missy, thoughts as someone who wasn't there for what you'd like to see next time?
I'm trying to figure out a classy way of making the statement I'm about to make, and I don't think I have a classy way of saying it, so I'm just going to say it, which is that I believe that those who are supposed to be there should be there, which would include the General Convention official youth presence and the General Convention youth program. There are reasons why both of those communities exist, and I still think it was a tremendous mistake not to include them this time around, for multiple reasons. The children's program, because deputies, bishops need that resource. That's why the resolution was created. That's why the program was created. I think we're less when both of those groups aren't there. I love the idea of being able to get and pack things in. I'm also looking at people who've come out of General Convention and home from General Convention, and the look of exhaustion seems to be just as much as it was in 4 days as it usually is in a longer period. And I but I'm curious about the conversations that didn't have the opportunity to happen, because there was so much packed into that time. And I think sometimes that's where, I think there's real creation that happens when people actually get to be present to each other. That's where real resources and creativity and engagement happens.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So we have a few minutes left. I just want to say, there were so many powerful things that did go on the consent calendar that went through. I lament the fact that a lot of people couldn't read them all or even know about all of them. And so do any of you have any tips or ways we can bring them back? I want to highlight for my friend Brian Sellers Peterson, who I know is here, the awesome environmental justice resolutions that all went through, some really great ones around for environment and creation care around net carbon neutrality and global climate change and all the things we could be doing. And as those kind of slipped under the radar and got approved, like, and I think this has constantly been a problem for us, right, in the Episcopal Church, that we pass resolutions that we say we believe in things, and then how do we actually do something about that? And have any of you seen, I think, Leon, you gave an example of workshops, but yeah, Jeff.
Just to say, I learned this by serving on a couple of like massive boards in my past life, a hospital and that kind of thing. And I learned that consent calendar is not just a convenience, it's a discipline. And it demands more of participants, actually. You have to do your homework. They have to read and study those things. And if you want to remove it from the consent calendar, there's a way to do that in both houses, if you think this really needs to be kicked around in person. Otherwise, a consent is just that. Yep, I'm for this. It's a vote. But it's a discipline I think we need to learn for these things to work the way they're supposed to.
I wonder if now that we've done it one time, with doing some of the pre-convention work ahead of time, we would have better turnout to some of the legislative committee hearings, because people kind of would know what to expect and how to sign up. And I think there was something about the newness that it was just, I think people assumed, well, we'll just figure it out when we get to General Convention. And then we got to General Convention, we didn't have time to just figure it out because there was the last minute scramble. But I wonder if it's, I think Martha Gardner said, what's the balance that we can include more folks, because it is very expensive, and that people can't take, other than, we're all church professionals on this call here. And so it's a luxury for us that I get paid to actually go do it and have fun and kick it with Edwin at, a taco spot. And so I
want to be careful that we're not assuming that everybody who goes is being paid to be there. Because Lydia, you just said that about everybody on this group, and that hasn't been,
okay.
I don't think that's been all of our experiences. So I know it is the experience of some, but it's not the experience of everybody. Got
it. I think those of us on the call have had church jobs to where going to General Convention wouldn't mean you lose employment, whereas that can be the case of some of our members of our congregations who might want to come as deputies to General Convention. So I think there is, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I'm interrupting you, Lydia. I don't mean to do that.
No, you're okay. I think you get where I'm going with this, and it's touchy, right? Like, how do we figure it out?
I do. I just want to point to one of the challenges we experienced on Committee 12 with 65 plus resolutions, and representatives on our committee from everywhere from France to the islands in the Pacific. We had to schedule often our hearings at a time when only people with the leisure to come in the middle of the day, for the sake of including everybody on the committee. So the challenge is abound. I don't have an answer to it, but awareness of there are great minds, I think, who can work on that. How do we overcome the challenges? Or how to at least modify them in a way that's reasonable. This is new.
No, I mean, and I think I agree. I mean, an aspect of it that I didn't enjoy was feeling like, I felt like I was just closing some of the work of my interim body, and all of a sudden, I was meeting with my committee often, and so there was a way that it convention kind of grew time-wise out of its box that crowded family time and church time and other things like that. Obviously, not just for me, but for everybody. One thing that was totally great, it feels just like a mechanical thing, but interpretation, linguistic interpretation is honestly far cheaper and far easier over Zoom. And I mean, I remember a couple conventions ago having someone show up to give a testimony and running around to find somebody, who could interpret for them. And I think just having that ability to do that in a way that's so much more accessible for people, I think was great. So yeah, I mean, I definitely hope we carry it. We carry a lot of that forward. And somebody put in the chat, just talking about not just doing it, but doing it well. Okay. And that's part of the reason I'm glad that we have, so many awesome minds that are committed to this, because now, in these years to come, we can really figure that out and do that more effectively.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. We're at our hour. I have been tasked with saying that the next event for lifelong learning for Virginia Theological Seminary is on Thursday, August 11th. And it's for folks specifically in the Washington metropolitan area. It's back to school night to learn about all of their upcoming fall classes and meet instructors. So that's August 11th. Thank you all for joining us.